Settle in and let your shoulders soften. Let the day be over for now, even if your mind is still carrying a few loose threads. You don't have to tie them up tonight. You can simply rest and listen while we wander through a quiet landscape of gentle science. In this long, slow drift toward sleep, we'll explore the human brain, not in a loud, flashy way, but like walking through a museum after closing time, when the halls are dim and every exhibit feels calmer and more personal. We'll talk about perception and memory, about dreams and attention, about the tiny tricks your senses play, and the graceful ways your mind fills in the gaps. And if you find these quiet explorations comforting, you're always welcome to like this video or subscribe to the channel. It helps this little corner of the internet reach other sleepy minds who might need it too. And then you can simply sink back into the pillow with nothing else to do. Now, one of the most soothing thoughts about the brain is that it isn't a single, solid thing. It's more like a living conversation. Different regions are always exchanging messages, sometimes agreeing, sometimes negotiating, sometimes gently competing to decide what you'll notice, what you'll ignore, and what you'll feel. Even your sense of now is negotiated, because the world doesn't arrive in your brain instantly. Light takes time to reach you. Sound takes time too. Signals take time to travel from your eyes and ears, through nerve pathways, into deeper structures that interpret them. And yet, you don't experience life as a lagging stream of delayed signals. Instead, your brain quietly stitches a smooth present together, like a careful editor, aligning what happened a moment ago into something that feels continuous and immediate. In a way, the present you feel is already a polished draft, and that gentle editing shows up in a famous little quirk of vision, your blind spot. Each of our eyes has a place on the retina where the optic nerve leaves the eye, and there are no light-sensing cells there. If you close one eye and look for it in the right way, you can make a small object disappear, not because it vanished, but because it landed on that patch of no signal. Yet, in daily life, you never notice a hole in your vision. That's because your brain fills it in, seamlessly. It borrows from the surrounding patterns, colors, and edges, and paints a sensible continuation. It's not a mistake, exactly. It's a kindness, a quiet promise your brain makes to you. I will keep the world stable, even if I have to improvise a little. And it doesn't only do that with blind spots. In fact, a surprising amount of what you see is inference. Your eyes gather light and contrast, but your experience of a chair, a face, a room, comes from interpretation. The brain is constantly predicting what's likely out there, then checking those predictions against incoming data. When the match is good, you feel reality as smooth and obvious. When the match is strange, you get an illusion, and illusions are one of the gentlest proofs that perception is active, not passive. Consider the way your brain handles edges. In the natural world, sharp edges often matter. They separate objects. They hint at boundaries you can grasp, avoid, or step over. So, the visual system tends to emphasize edges, enhancing contrast in a way that makes outlines pop. This is part of why some patterns seem to shimmer, or why two identical shades can look different depending on what surrounds them. Your brain isn't trying to trick you. It's trying to be helpful, turning messy light into usable meaning. Meaning is its favorite thing. And that brings us to a lovely detail about the brain's wiring. The surface of the brain, the cortex, looks crumpled, full of folds and grooves. That wrinkled design is not an accident. Folding allows a large surface area to fit into a small space, like packing more paper into a notebook by creasing it. More surface area means room for more cortical tissue, more networks, more subtle processing. It's like the brain chose to be a little origami universe. Those folds also help create neighborhoods. Regions that do similar kinds of work end up near each other, connected by bundles of white matter underneath, like quiet roads between towns. And those connections matter as much as the regions themselves. Some neuroscientists even like to say that the brain is less like a collection of parts and more like a collection of relationships. Relationships are what make it feel like you. One small, deep structure that often appears in these conversations is the hippocampus. It's tucked in on each side, and it's especially important for forming new memories that you can later describe. The kind that have a storyline, a place, a sense of "I was there." The name comes from a seahorse-like shape, which feels fitting because the hippocampus helps you navigate, not just through space, but through time. When you remember a day, you aren't opening a file and replaying it, you're rebuilding it. Memory is reconstructive, which means it's more like telling a story than watching a recording. Each time you recall an event, your brain reassembles pieces, impressions, emotions, fragments of detail, and it fills in what's missing with what seems reasonable. Then, that rebuilt version can become the one you store again. Over time, the story can drift, not because you're careless, but because your brain is designed for meaning, not perfect archives. It keeps the gist, the shape of the experience, the lesson. And as you drift towards sleep, it's comforting to know that forgetting is not only normal, it's useful. A brain that remembered every detail would drown in clutter. Forgetting is a kind of mental housekeeping. It clears room for what matters next. It softens sharp edges. It lets patterns stand out. In fact, even while you sleep, the brain seems to tidy. During deep sleep, activity patterns in certain memory circuits can replay, like a quiet rehearsal. The idea is that some memories, especially new ones, may be gradually stabilized and integrated with older knowledge, not in a loud, conscious way, but in the background, while you rest. So, when you sleep, you're not turning off, you're switching modes. And one of the sweetest mysteries is how the brain chooses what to keep. Sometimes, the things you thought were important fade quickly, while a small, ordinary moment sticks around. A smell from a hallway, a glance in the rain, a single sentence someone said. The brain seems to tag memories with emotion and novelty, with relevance, with a sense of surprise. Not all surprises are dramatic. Sometimes the surprise is simply, "This mattered more than I expected." Speaking of smell, it has a special route into the brain. Unlike most senses, smell has a more direct line to regions involved in emotion and memory. That's one reason a scent can feel like a time machine. You catch a hint of soap, or coffee, or warm grass, and suddenly you're somewhere else, with a whole mood attached. It's not just that you remember, it's that you feel the remembering in your body. This is part of why gentle scents can feel so calming at night. And while we're with the senses, here's a quiet marvel. Your brain is constantly combining them into one unified world. Sight, sound, touch, balance, body position, all braided together. If you watch someone speak, for example, your brain blends what you see, and what you hear into a single experience of their voice. In certain setups, changing the mouth movement can even change what syllable you think you heard. It's not that hearing is weak, it's that the brain trusts multiple streams and aims for the best overall explanation. It's always choosing the most likely story. Another gentle quirk is that your brain is not equally aware of everything happening inside you. You don't feel your liver working. You don't hear your immune system planning. Even your heartbeat, most of the time, is background. Yet the brain monitors these signals quietly, using them to shape emotion, alertness, and comfort. Some theories even suggest that part of what you call a feeling is the brain's interpretation of your body's internal state, translated into a simple message like safe, uncertain, energized, tired. And tired is a perfectly good message right now. Your attention, too, is not a spotlight you control perfectly. It's more like a curious animal that can be guided, but not commanded. The brain has networks that help focus on a task, and other networks that wander, daydreaming, remembering, imagining. When you're trying to fall asleep, the wandering network can become extra lively, tossing up scenes and thoughts like soft paper lanterns. A useful thing to know is that wandering is not failure, it's a normal rhythm. Even the default mode of the brain, the patterns it returns to when you're not focused on the outside world, is rich and active. It's involved in reflection, imagination, and the sense of self across time. In a way, your brain's resting state is not empty at all. It's a quiet internal ocean, moving slowly, reshaping the shoreline of your thoughts. And as you lie here, listening, you can let that ocean move. You don't have to catch every fact. You don't have to remember them. Let them pass through like soft light through curtains. Interesting if you notice them, harmless if you don't. Now, here's a small, lovely detail about the way your brain maps your body. On the surface of the brain, there are regions that represent different parts of you. Hands, lips, face, feet. Not as a neat little picture, but as a kind of living map. And that map isn't proportional to your physical size. It's proportional to sensitivity and control. So areas like your fingers and lips, which have fine sensation and delicate movement, take up more space on the map than, say, your back. It's as if the brain dedicates more attention land to parts of you that can do intricate things. And those maps can change with experience. When someone practices a skill that requires fine movement, like playing an instrument, the brain's representations can shift. This is one of the gentle meanings of plasticity. Not that the brain becomes anything at all, instantly, but that it remains adaptable, always adjusting its internal maps based on what you do, what you practice, and what you pay attention to. Even paying attention is a kind of training. And tonight, you can train the simplest skill of all, letting go, because the brain also has a beautiful ability to downshift, to reduce the volume on the outside world, to loosen its grip on the day, to let thoughts become softer around the edges. And as that happens, we can continue drifting deeper into the quiet wonders of the mind. One of the gentlest wonders is that your brain is never really seeing the world raw. It's always smoothing, correcting, and completing. Think about the way your eyes move. They don't glide like a camera on a track. They jump in quick little movements, called saccades, several times each second, darting from point to point. And here's the calm surprise. During those jumps, your visual sensitivity drops. If you perceived every blur, the world would feel like a constant motion smear. Instead, your brain quietly edits the gaps, stitching the moments before and after each jump into one stable scene. So stability is something your brain creates for you, again and again, every second. And even within that stable scene, there's a quieter detail most people don't notice. The sharp, detailed part of your vision is actually very small, centered around a tiny region of the retina. Outside that, your vision is much less detailed. Yet the world doesn't look like a crisp circle surrounded by fuzz. Your brain fills in the sense of clarity across the whole view, using memory, prediction, and a kind of clever assumption. If it looked clear a moment ago, it's probably still clear now. Your experience is a beautifully maintained illusion, in the kindest sense. Now, let's drift toward another part of the brain that feels almost like a conductor. The thalamus sits deep inside, and one of its roles is to help route sensory information. It's often described as a relay station, but that makes it sound like a passive mailbox. In reality, it's more like a gatekeeper with taste. It helps decide what signals get emphasized, what gets quieted, and what gets synchronized with the rhythms of attention. And at night, those rhythms change. During certain stages of sleep, the thalamus helps reduce the flow of outside sensory input to the cortex. It's not that your ears stop working, it's that the brain decides, gently, to stop promoting most sounds to the level of full awareness. This is part of why you can sleep through a familiar hum, but wake quickly to a baby's cry, or the sound of your own name. The sleeping brain still monitors the world. It just changes its priorities. It listens with one ear half open, while keeping you safe. Another comforting fact is that your brain is intensely rhythmic. Neurons don't just fire as isolated sparks. Large populations can synchronize into waves. Slow waves, spindles, ripples, patterns that rise and fall like tides. Some of these rhythms are closely linked to sleep and memory. Sleep spindles, for example, are brief bursts of activity that can appear during lighter stages of non-REM sleep. They're thought to be involved in protecting sleep from disruption, and possibly in the processing of learning. It's like your brain wraps itself in a soft, moving blanket of rhythm. And then there are dreams. Dreams can feel like cinema, like nonsense, like poetry, like a secret diary written in fog. One calm way to think about dreams is that they're the brain's storytelling machinery, running without strong input from the outside world. The networks that create images, emotions, and narratives are active, while the networks that check and censor those narratives can be quieter. That's part of why a dream can accept impossible things without protest. You can meet someone in a house that is also a train, and it feels normal. The brain is not trying to embarrass you with weirdness. It's simply exploring, combining, rehearsing, playing. And here's a small detail about why many dreams vanish quickly. The brain systems that help store new experiences into long-lasting, retrievable memory are not working in quite the same way during certain dream-rich stages. So, the dream may be vivid while you're inside it, but it isn't tagged and filed for later, the way daytime events often are. Unless something wakes you, or the dream has a strong emotion, it can dissolve like breath on a mirror. It was real, and then it was gone. There's also something quietly amusing about how the brain handles the feeling of certainty. You might assume that when you're confident about something, your brain has checked all the evidence and reached a solid conclusion. But confidence is often a feeling generated by the brain, based on how smoothly a thought comes to mind, how familiar it feels, how coherent it seems. Sometimes a wrong idea can feel confident because it fits neatly with expectations. The brain loves smooth stories, and this is why illusions of memory can happen. If you've heard a story many times, you may begin to remember details you never experienced directly, because the brain has built a strong, coherent model. It's not lying, it's doing what it does best, building meaning. A gentler version of this happens all day with language. When you read or listen, your brain predicts what's coming next. It's so fast that you can miss small errors, or fill in a word that wasn't actually there. If you've ever reread a sentence and realized your eyes slid right past a missing word, that's your predictive brain at work, smoothing the road. And smoothing is very useful, especially when you're tired. Now, tucked under the cortex is a set of structures, often called the basal ganglia. They're involved in movement, habit formation, and choosing actions. One soothing thought about habits is that, once learned, they can run with less conscious effort. That's why you can tie your shoes while thinking about something else, or walk through a familiar room in the dark with surprising ease. The brain is always trying to save energy by turning repeated actions into efficient routines. Efficiency is one of its quiet superpowers, and because the brain is so hungry to save energy, it can sometimes resist change, not out of stubbornness, but out of conservation. New habits take attention and effort, which feel costly. Old habits run on well-worn pathways, which feel easy. When you practice something new, you're not just learning content. You're persuading your brain that the effort is worth it. Tonight, the effort can be very small. Just breathing, just listening, just letting the nervous system settle. Speaking of settling, there's a branch of your nervous system that calms the body, often described as rest and digest. It slows the heart, supports digestion, and encourages relaxation. The brain communicates with the body through this system constantly, and one of the most gentle ways to influence it is through slow breathing. Long, easy exhales can nudge the body toward calm, and the brain notices that calm and begins to treat the moment as safe. Safe is the doorway to sleep. Now, let's drift into a curious detail about your sense of self. You might feel like there's a single you in the middle of your head, watching everything like a lighthouse keeper. But many neuroscientists see the self as a kind of ongoing construction, a narrative the brain produces, integrating memory, body signals, goals, and social awareness. It feels unified because it's stitched together smoothly, like perception. Even you is a gentle kind of story. And when that story loosens, which can happen in deep relaxation, you may notice moments where thoughts feel more distant, as if they're happening on their own. That's not something to fear. It's often just the brain releasing its tight grip. The narrator in the mind becomes quieter, and experience becomes simpler. Breath, warmth, weight, stillness. Stillness is not emptiness. It's a soft clearing. Now, here's a small, quiet wonder about sound. Your brain is remarkably good at separating a signal from noise. In a busy room, you can focus on one voice among many, a trick sometimes called the cocktail party effect. The brain uses tiny differences in timing between your ears and subtle frequency cues to locate and isolate sounds. It's doing constant math in the background, turning vibrations in air into meaning. And at night, when the room is quiet, you may notice the opposite effect, that the brain becomes more sensitive to small sounds. A distant car, a house settling, a small click. This is normal. As the world becomes simpler, the brain has less to process, so minor signals can stand out more. The best response is not to fight them, but to let them be part of the night, like the soft background of a landscape. Sounds can pass through you without needing to be solved, and as you continue to drift, we can keep wandering through these calm, hidden talents of the brain, letting each one arrive, unfold, and then gently fade. There's a tender kind of intelligence in the way your brain chooses what to notice. At any moment, an enormous amount of information is available. The feeling of fabric on your skin, the pressure where you meet the mattress, the faint light behind your eyelids, distant sounds, tiny shifts in temperature, the position of your tongue, the rhythm of your breath. If all of it rose to the same level of awareness, you'd be overwhelmed. So, attention is not just focus, it's protection. And one quiet truth is that attention can be guided by two different forces. One is bottom-up, when something bright, sudden, or unusual pulls you automatically. The other is top-down, when your goals gently aim your focus, like choosing to listen to a friend in a crowded room. At night, when goals soften, bottom-up signals can feel louder. A small itch, a thought, a creak. But as sleep approaches, the brain begins to lower the gain, turning the world down, one notch at a time. You don't have to do it perfectly. The brain already knows the way. Now, let's drift into something that sounds simple, but is surprisingly deep. Your brain contains a map of space, and it's not only a map of the outside world, it's also a map of where you are within it. This is part of why you can close your eyes and still touch your nose, or reach for a glass on the bedside table without looking. The brain combines signals from vision, touch, balance, and muscle position to create a quiet, continuous sense of location. And in that inner geography, there are special cells that act a bit like landmarks. Some neurons, discovered in studies of navigation, become active when an animal is in a particular location. Others respond to the edges of an environment, like the boundary of a wall. And some create grid-like patterns, firing in repeating spatial intervals, as if laying a subtle coordinate system over the world. Together, these signals help build an internal sense of place, and an internal sense of movement through place. It's like having a soft, invisible compass inside. Even more soothing, those same navigation circuits may help with abstract journeys too. When you think through a timeline, plan a route through ideas, or imagine the steps of a story, you may be using some of the brain's spatial machinery to move through concepts. Your mind walks through thoughts the way your body walks through rooms. Now, consider something even quieter, the brain's sense of time. Time feels steady, like a river flowing at one speed. But your perception of time can stretch and compress, depending on attention and emotion. When you're bored, a minute can feel like a slow hallway. When you're absorbed, an hour can disappear. The brain doesn't have a single clock ticking in one place. Instead, timing seems to be distributed, emerging from patterns of activity across networks, like many small metronomes loosely coordinating. Time, in the brain, is more like music than machinery. And music brings us to another gentle curiosity: why rhythm can soothe you so effectively. Slow, predictable patterns can help the brain anticipate what's coming next, reducing uncertainty. When the next beat is expected, the nervous system can relax a little. This is part of why lullabies work, why ocean sounds feel calming, why steady breathing can soften the body. Predictability is a kind of safety signal. Now, if we keep wandering, we find a small region near the back of the brain that is especially tuned to faces. Faces are important to humans, so the brain treats them as special. It doesn't just see eyes and a mouth, it recognizes a face as a whole pattern. And that specialization is so strong that we sometimes see faces where none exist. In clouds, in outlets, in the front of cars. That gentle habit has a name: pareidolia. It's not foolishness, it's a bias towards social meaning. If your brain sometimes mistakes a shadow for a face, the cost is small. But if it missed a real face when it mattered, the cost could have been larger. So the brain leans toward recognition, toward finding minds in the world. And that same social wiring shows up in a quiet chemical messenger that often gets described too simply. Oxytocin is sometimes called the love hormone, but it's not a magic potion for kindness. It's more like a social amplifier. In the right context, it can deepen feelings of trust and connection. In other contexts, it can strengthen the sense of us versus them. The brain uses chemistry to nudge attention and emotion, but the meaning still comes from the situation, the memories, the story you're living inside. Everything in the brain is context sensitive, like light through different windows. Now, let's soften into a calm detail about learning. When you practice something, your brain doesn't only strengthen the correct pathway, it also learns what to ignore. It becomes better at filtering irrelevant movements and unhelpful options. In other words, skill is not only addition, it's subtraction, it's refinement. The brain is constantly sculpting, keeping what works, letting the rest fade. And this sculpting happens at many scales, from tiny changes at connections between neurons to broader shifts in how networks coordinate. Over time, patterns that were effortful become smooth. The brain's energy use becomes more efficient. Your actions become quieter inside. Quiet is the signature of mastery. There's also a gentle truth about mistakes. The brain has systems that monitor for mismatch, the difference between what you expected and what happened. When the mismatch is small, it's a soft correction. When it's big, it can trigger a stronger signal that says, pay attention, update the model. This is one reason surprising moments can feel vivid. Surprise is the brain's way of saying, this matters for learning. But tonight, you don't need surprise. You can let everything be predictable, safe, slow. Now, one of the most comforting quirks of memory is that it isn't stored in one place like a treasure chest. A memory is more like a pattern distributed across many regions. The sights, the sounds, the feelings, the meaning. Each component has its own traces. To remember is to reassemble. That's why a single cue can bring so much back. A particular song can unlock a whole season of your life. A certain texture can carry a mood. A word can reopen a scene. Your brain is a library where the books are written across many shelves. And because remembering involves reconstruction, imagination is never far away. The networks used to remember the past overlap with networks used to imagine the future. To picture tomorrow, the brain borrows pieces from yesterday, recombining them into something new. This is part of why planning can feel like daydreaming, and why daydreaming can sometimes feel like rehearsal. The brain practices possibilities. Now, let's drift toward a quiet nighttime phenomenon you may have felt before. That sudden falling sensation as you're nearly asleep, followed by a little body jerk. It's often called a hypnic jerk. One idea is that as your muscles relax quickly, the brain may briefly interpret the shift as a loss of balance, and it sends a small corrective jolt. It's harmless, common, and usually fades as sleep deepens. A little ripple as you cross the shoreline into sleep. And if it happens, you don't have to chase it with worry. You can simply notice and let it pass, the way you'd let a wave wash up and recede. Now, here's a softer detail about dreams again, but from a different angle. Even when dreams feel chaotic, they often circle themes that matter to you. Unfinished conversations, social situations, problems with no solution yet. It can be gentle to think of dreaming as the mind's way of turning emotional material over, like smoothing a stone in the palm. Not every dream has a message. Many are just the brain entertaining itself, but the emotional tone can still be part of nightly processing, a quiet mixing of feelings until the water clears. And as you continue to rest, you can let your brain do what it has always done. Integrate, tidy, soften. You don't need to direct it. You can simply allow it. Let each breath be a small signal of permission. Permission to slow down. Permission to drift. Permission to be held by the night. And we can keep wandering gently through the brain's calm hidden corners, where the science stays warm and the edges stay soft. Here's something quietly fascinating about your sense of what's important. In the brain, importance isn't decided by a single judge. It's more like a committee. Attention networks, emotion circuits, memory systems, and body signals all vote. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't. That's why you can know, logically, that something isn't urgent, and still feel pulled toward it. The feeling is part of the brain's voting process. And at night, when you want to sleep, you can gently lower the volume on those votes by giving the brain fewer problems to solve. One reason calming routines work is that they reduce decision-making. The brain loves closure. When you repeat familiar steps, wash up, dim the lights, settle into bed, you're sending a pattern the brain recognizes as safe, predictable, finished. And the brain responds by shifting its chemistry and rhythms toward rest. Even reading or listening to a soft voice can be a cue. This is bedtime. Now, let's wander into the strange and beautiful way your brain constructs your body. You might assume that your brain has direct access to what's happening in you, but even your own body is partly inferred. The brain receives signals from skin, joints, muscles, and internal organs, and then it builds a unified model. This is my hand. This is my foot. This is where I end, and the world begins. Most of the time, that model feels unquestionable, but with the right gentle illusion, the model can shift. In a classic demonstration, if someone sees a rubber hand being stroked in sync with their hidden real hand, their brain can start to treat the rubber hand as part of their body. Not because they're gullible, but because the brain trusts synchronized sensory evidence. If sight and touch agree strongly enough, the brain updates its model to match. It's like the brain says, if it feels like me and looks like me, it may as well be me. This flexibility is not a flaw. It's part of how you use tools. When you hold a pen or use a fork, your brain can treat it as an extension of your hand, incorporating it into your sense of reach. Skilled tool use is, in a way, temporary body expansion. Your boundaries are more fluid than they feel. Now, drift with me towards something even softer, your inner voice. Many people experience a steady stream of silent speech in the mind. It can narrate, plan, rehearse, comment, worry, sing. And yet, not everyone has the same kind of inner voice. Some people think more in images, sensations, or abstract shapes. The brain is flexible in how it represents thought. Language is powerful, but it's not the only format. And even when you do have an inner voice, it's not a separate person living in your head. It's a function, a tool, a way the brain uses language to organize experience. At night, that tool can keep working out of habit, even when you're ready to rest. One gentle trick is to treat the inner voice like a radio in another room. You don't have to shut it off by force. You can let it play softly in the background while your attention rests elsewhere, perhaps on breath or warmth or the weight of your blanket. The voice can fade when you stop feeding it. Now, here's a small, surprising fact about the brain's energy use. For an organ that's only a small fraction of body weight, the brain consumes a large share of the body's energy at rest. It's busy even when you're doing nothing. That's because maintaining networks, balancing chemistry, and keeping signals ready requires constant work. And because the brain is such an energy-hungry organ, it's always looking for shortcuts. One shortcut is chunking. Instead of treating every detail separately, the brain groups patterns into units. A phone number becomes chunks. A familiar song becomes a single flowing object rather than separate notes. A skilled movement becomes one sequence rather than many conscious steps. Chunking makes life feel smoother, and it frees attention for other things. Smoothness is an energy-saving strategy. Now, let's drift into a gentle phenomenon you may have felt, especially when tired. That sense that a word you know well suddenly feels strange. You look at it, or say it, and it loses meaning for a moment, like a shell. This is sometimes called semantic satiation. When you repeat a word again and again, the brain's processing of it can temporarily dull. It's like the meaning circuit says, we've handled this too many times in a row, and it quiets down. It's a tiny reminder that meaning is active, not glued to the word. And in a way, sleep does something similar. It loosens the tight grip of meaning. Thoughts become less sticky. Associations become softer. The brain's constant interpreting relaxes. Now, something soothing about the brain's chemistry. It runs on balances, not absolutes. Excitation and inhibition, wake signals and sleep signals, alertness and calm. The brain doesn't simply press an on button or an off button. It blends states. That's why you can feel drowsy but still think, or relaxed but still awake, or awake but oddly dreamy. Sleep is a gradual dimming, not a sudden switch. And in that dimming, one group of molecules plays a gentle role: adenosine. As you stay awake, adenosine levels build up in certain brain areas, increasing sleep pressure. It's like a quiet hourglass. Caffeine works, in part, by blocking adenosine receptors, masking that sleep pressure for a while. But eventually, the hourglass still empties. The body still asks for rest. Tonight, you can let the hourglass do its work. Now, here is a calm curiosity about the way the brain handles uncertainty. When you're unsure, the brain tends to keep searching. It runs simulations. It revisits. It tries to reduce the unknown. This can be useful in the day, but at night, uncertainty can keep the mind lightly active. One gentle way to signal no need to search is to accept imperfection. If a thought arises that wants an answer, you can let it float by with a soft phrase like, "Not now," or "It can wait," or simply "later." You're not ignoring the problem forever. You're just telling the brain that this is not the time for solving. Night is for settling. Now, let's drift into a beautiful piece of brain architecture, the corpus callosum, a broad bridge of fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres. It allows information to travel between sides, coordinating perception, movement, and thought. The two hemispheres are not separate minds. They're deeply integrated, but they do show subtle differences in specialization, and the bridge helps them share their strengths. It's like two quiet collaborators passing notes across a table. In rare medical situations where this bridge is cut to reduce severe seizures, researchers have learned interesting things about how information can be divided between hemispheres. These split brain findings are often told in a dramatic way, but the calm truth is more subtle. They reveal that some types of information can be processed without becoming part of a unified verbal report. A person might respond to something with one hand or one side of the visual field without being able to easily name it aloud. It's a gentle reminder that consciousness is layered. Not everything the brain knows becomes something you can say, and that is true in everyday life too. Your brain guides posture, balance, and countless tiny decisions without you narrating them. It makes quick judgments of familiarity and safety. It anticipates the next word in a sentence. It tunes your mood to the room. Much of your intelligence is quiet, background, supportive. The brain is a silent helper. Now, as you listen, you can let that helper take over. Let it manage the breathing. Let it manage the drifting. You can rest in the feeling that you don't have to be in charge of every thought. You can simply float, while the brain continues its soft nighttime work, and the edges of the day dissolve into sleep. There's a gentle comfort in realizing that sleep doesn't erase you. It reorganizes you. One of the quiet tasks the brain seems to do at night is to adjust the balance between memories that should stay detailed and memories that can become more general. A specific afternoon might soften into a broader lesson. A new fact might find its place among older facts. It's as if the brain is not only storing experiences, but also filing them into a larger map of meaning, placing each new piece where it belongs. And sometimes, in that filing process, the brain becomes a little more creative. People often notice that a problem feels different after sleep, not necessarily solved, but loosened. The rigid edges soften. New connections seem possible. One calm explanation is that when the brain replays and reshuffles information, it can bring together ideas that were stored in different drawers. Sleep becomes a quiet workshop where concepts meet each other in new combinations, without the daytime pressure to be correct. A soft kind of imagination, supported by biology. Now, let's drift into a curious sensory phenomenon that some people experience in daily life: synesthesia. In synesthesia, a stimulus, in one sense, automatically evokes an experience in another. A person might perceive letters or numbers as having colours, or experience certain sounds as having shapes, or feel that days of the week sit in a particular spatial arrangement. It's not metaphor, it's perception. Synesthesia offers a gentle hint about how the brain is wired. Your senses are not completely separate channels. They're more like neighborhoods with many connecting paths. In most people, the connections stay subtle, so senses remain distinct. In synesthesia, some of those connections are stronger or more consistently linked, so the brain blends experiences in a stable way. It can be a reminder that the boundaries between senses are, in a way, negotiated. And the brain is capable of surprising harmonies. And speaking of harmonies, have you ever had a song get stuck in your head, looping gently, sometimes annoyingly, sometimes comfortingly? That's often called an earworm. The brain is tuned to patterns, and music is pattern-rich. A catchy melody has repetition, rhythm, and predictability. The very things your brain loves to rehearse. Sometimes, the loop is simply a byproduct of the brain's tendency to complete patterns, like wanting to finish a musical sentence. If the song is quiet enough, it can feel like a lullaby your mind keeps humming to itself. Another gentle quirk is the way the brain handles faces and emotions when information is incomplete. If you see a face in dim light or at an odd angle, your brain doesn't wait for perfect data. It makes a best guess quickly. That speed is useful, but it also means we sometimes read emotion into neutral expressions, especially when we're tired. A shadow can look like a frown. A blank look can seem judgmental. At night, it's helpful to remember that tired brains guess more, and a guess is not a fact. Now, here's a soft and elegant system that's been getting more attention in modern neuroscience. The flow of cerebrospinal fluid, the clear liquid that cushions the brain and spinal cord. This fluid is not only protective. During sleep, it appears to help with a kind of nighttime cleaning process, moving through spaces around brain cells and carrying away certain metabolic byproducts. The details are still being studied, but the overall idea is soothing. Sleep is a time when the brain can do maintenance, like a quiet tide washing a shoreline. You don't have to scrub your mind clean by effort. Your body already has systems for renewal, and those systems involve another group of quiet helpers, glial cells. For a long time, glia were treated like background support, while neurons got all the attention. But glia do far more than hold things together. Different types of glial cells help insulate nerve fibers, manage the chemical environment, and support the health of neural connections. Some even play a role in pruning and refining connections over time. It's like the brain has gardeners as well as messengers. Pruning too can sound harsh, but it's often gentle and beneficial. As the brain develops and learns, it strengthens useful pathways and weakens others. This makes networks more efficient. It's one reason practice matters. Repetition doesn't just add skill. It tells the brain, this pathway is worth keeping, and the things you stop doing slowly lose priority. The brain is always reorganizing toward what you use. At night, you can choose to use rest. Now, a calm fact about dreaming bodies. During certain stages of sleep, especially REM sleep, the brain actively reduces most muscle movement. This helps prevent you from acting out dreams. Your mind may be running vivid simulations, but your body stays mostly still, protected by its own built-in safety feature. If you've ever woken from a dream feeling like you were moving, but your body was motionless, that separation is part of the design, a quiet guardrail, keeping your sleep gentle. And while the body is still, the brain can be lively in a different way. Some areas involved in emotion and imagery can be more active, while areas involved in deliberate control can be less dominant. This blend can make dreams feel both intense and strangely accepting. Things happen and you flow with them. It's a little like the brain is practicing experience without the full weight of self-management, a rehearsal in a softer theatre. Now, let's drift into the way expectations shape perception. Your brain is not only a sense organ, it's also a prediction engine. Expectations can influence how pain feels, how effort feels, even how a taste is experienced. This is part of why the placebo effect can be real. Belief and context can alter the brain's interpretation of signals. And the opposite can happen too, when negative expectations amplify discomfort. It's not all in your head in a dismissive way. It's in your head in the most literal way. The brain is the interpreter. At night, this can be helpful. If you expect your bed to be safe, your pillow to be comfortable, your room to be quiet enough, your brain is more likely to interpret small sensations as harmless. A tiny creak becomes just a house settling. A distant sound becomes part of the night. Expectation can be a soft lens that turns sharpness into calm. Now, here's a detail about your sense of temperature that's surprisingly connected to sleep. Your core body temperature tends to drift slightly downward as you approach sleep, and certain warming routines, like a warm shower, can help by prompting the body to cool afterward. The brain's temperature regulation and sleep regulation are closely connected, like two dancers moving together. Warmth can be comforting, but it's often the gentle cooling afterward that supports drowsiness. So, if you feel yourself settling, that's not only mood, it's physiology, quietly doing its work. And while we're with physiology, consider how much of your brain's activity is shaped by tiny chemicals crossing tiny gaps. Neurotransmitters are often described as simple happy or stress chemicals, but in reality, they're more like tuning knobs. They adjust sensitivity, timing, and coordination across networks. The same chemical can have different effects depending on which receptors are present and where in the brain it's acting. Everything is nuanced and beautifully specific. Now, a soothing thought about focus. When you concentrate deeply, certain networks become more dominant and others quiet down. When you relax, the balance shifts. There's a gentle rhythm of engagement and release. You can't hold focused attention forever. The brain is built for cycles. Even during waking life, the mind naturally drifts in and out, scanning and returning, like a slow lighthouse beam. Sleep is simply the deepest version of that cycle. So, if your attention drifts as you listen, that's perfect. If you miss a sentence, wonderful. If your mind wanders into a soft blur, that's the doorway opening. You can keep letting the facts arrive like slow snow, settling without effort. Each one a small, quiet marvel, and each one free to fade, as the night carries you further into rest. There's another quiet illusion your brain gives you almost every time you look around. You feel as if you see the whole scene in rich detail, all at once. But what you truly gather in high resolution is a small area at the center of your gaze, and the rest is a tapestry woven from brief samples and smart guesses. The brain is constantly asking, what's most likely here? And then it fills in the rest with a calm confidence. That confidence is useful. It saves energy. It keeps you from feelings like the world is flickering. And it also helps explain a gentle phenomenon called change blindness. If a change happens during a brief disruption, a blink, a quick cut, a moment of distraction, people often fail to notice surprisingly large differences. It's not because they're careless. It's because the brain doesn't store every pixel of a scene. It stores meaning, the gist of what matters. If the meaning hasn't changed much, the brain may decide there's nothing worth announcing. Your mind is not a camera, it's a storyteller. Now, let's drift into a familiar feeling you may have had, the tip of the tongue moment. You know a word. You can feel it nearby, but it won't arrive. That sensation is a small window into how memory is organized. Retrieving a word isn't just pulling a label. The brain often reconstructs it through networks of sound, meaning, and context. Sometimes the meaning is available, and even the first letter, but the full pattern doesn't lock in. The brain is close, but not quite aligned. If you've noticed that stepping away can help, that makes sense too. When you stop pushing, other associations can quietly activate, and the network can settle into the right pattern. The word appears not because you forced it, but because you gave the system room to complete itself. Room is what sleep gives the brain. Now, here is a softer detail about why mental effort can feel tiring even without physical movement. When you concentrate, the brain can increase activity in certain networks, and this changes the balance of chemicals and resources in subtle ways. The fatigue you feel after intense thinking is real. It's a biological signal, not just a mood. Your brain is an organ doing work, and it asks for recovery. Tonight, recovery is the plan, and recovery is guided by one of the brain's most elegant timekeepers, the circadian system. Deep in the brain, there's a small region that helps coordinate daily rhythms, syncing sleepiness, alertness, hormones, and body temperature to the day-night cycle. It's like an internal sunrise and sunset, not always perfectly aligned with the clock on the wall, but steady in its own way. Light is one of its strongest cues. That's why bright light late at night can make the brain feel like it's still daytime, and why softer light and darkness help the brain lean into sleep. Some cells in the eye are especially sensitive to certain wavelengths and send timing information inward, not for seeing images, but for setting the body's schedule. You can think of them as tiny sunset detectors, helping your brain decide what kind of night it is. A quiet kind of astronomy inside your eyes. And within that nightly schedule, sleep is not one uniform state. It's a cycling landscape. You move through stages with different rhythms and patterns. Some stages are deep and slow, with big waves of coordinated activity. Others are more dreamlike, with a lively brain and a still body. Across the night, these stages shift in a gentle choreography, like tides changing strength. Even if you don't remember it, your brain remembers the rhythm. Now, here's a calming truth about waking up in the night. It's common. Human sleep naturally includes brief awakenings, often so short you don't recall them. Sometimes you become aware of one, and it feels like you've ruined the night. But often, it's just part of the normal pattern. The brain checks the environment, notes that things are safe, and drifts back down. You can treat it like turning over in a boat, a small movement, and then stillness again. Now, let's wander into a gentle, odd sensation. Déjà vu. That sudden feeling that you've experienced this exact moment before. It can be eerie, but it's usually harmless. One idea is that it happens when the brain's familiarity signal fires at the wrong time. The circuits that tag a moment as known become active, even though the specific memory isn't there. So, you get the feeling of recognition without the story that explains it, a little echo without a source. And the opposite can happen too. Sometimes you're in a familiar place, doing familiar steps, and it suddenly feels strange, as if you've never been there. That can occur when the familiarity signal dips unexpectedly, making the ordinary feel newly seen. Both sensations remind us that familiarity is a feeling the brain generates, not a direct measurement of reality. Your brain is always coloring experience with quiet signals. Now, a softer sense that often goes unnoticed until it misbehaves is the vestibular system, your sense of balance and motion. It lives in the inner ear and tells the brain how your head is moving, how gravity is pulling, how you're oriented. It's part of why you can walk without thinking, and why you can close your eyes and still know which way is up. It's also deeply connected to nausea, calm, and sleepiness. Gentle rocking can soothe because it interacts with vestibular signals in a predictable, rhythmic way. Many mammals settle when rocked: a crib, a train, a boat. The brain reads steady motion as safe enough to relax into, a lullaby for your balance system. Now, consider another quiet sense: proprioception. This is your sense of where your body parts are, even without looking. Your brain creates this from signals in muscles, tendons, and joints. It's why you can scratch your elbow in the dark, or adjust your blanket without seeing it. And it's part of how you feel inhabited. When people describe feeling grounded or present, they often mean that the brain's model of the body is calm and coherent. At night, you can encourage that coherence simply by noticing a few points of contact: head on pillow, shoulders sinking, hands resting, feet heavy. These are not magical tricks. They're ways of giving the brain clear, quiet signals. Here is the body, safe, still. Stillness makes the brain's job easier. Now, let's drift back to attention, but from a different angle. There's a phenomenon called the attentional blink. When two important stimuli appear very close together, people sometimes miss the second one, even though it was right in front of them. It's as if the brain's spotlight takes a brief moment to reset after noticing something significant. This can be soothing to know because it means your brain is not built to catch everything. Missing things is normal. It's part of the design. Your mind is allowed to let go. Now, a quiet fact about emotions. People often imagine emotions as waves that appear fully formed, like weather systems arriving from nowhere. But the brain builds emotions from many ingredients: body signals, context, memory, prediction, and meaning. Two people can feel different emotions in the same situation because their brains interpret the ingredients differently. Even within one person, the same body sensation can be labeled differently depending on context. A racing heart can be excitement or anxiety, or simply caffeine, depending on the story the brain chooses. At night, when you're safe in bed, you can gently relabel sensations in a calming way. A flutter can be fatigue. A restless thought can be the brain unloading. A tightness can be the body softening. You're not forcing a lie. You're choosing the most soothing interpretation among many plausible ones. The brain listens to meaning. Now, something about imagination that feels surprisingly physical. When you imagine a movement vividly, some of the brain's motor planning areas can activate in a similar pattern to actually moving, just at a lower intensity. This is one reason mental rehearsal can improve skill. The brain can practice the plan without executing the action. So, when you imagine yourself relaxing, your brain is not indifferent. It's participating. You can imagine your jaw loosening, your tongue resting, your eyelids growing heavier, and your nervous system can follow that gentle suggestion. Now, here's a quiet sleep-related curiosity. Sometimes, as you fall asleep, you may hear a sound that isn't really there. A name, a knock, a brief phrase. These are often called hypnagogic hallucinations, though that word can sound dramatic. In most cases, they're harmless. They can occur as the brain's sensory systems shift into dreamlike processing while you're still partly awake. The boundary between waking perception and dreaming imagery becomes thin, like mist. If it happens, you can treat it like a stray firefly, a brief flash, and then darkness again. Now, another gentle moment in the night is that sense of drifting thoughts that don't quite connect. Images appear, then dissolve. A sentence begins, then melts. This is part of the transition into sleep. The brain's control networks loosen and associations become freer. It's not a problem. It's the doorway widening. You don't need to hold the thread. Let it slip. Now, one more calming detail about memory, especially as it relates to sleep. Some researchers describe two complementary processes, strengthening what matters and weakening what doesn't. Sleep can support both. It may reinforce certain useful patterns, while also letting unnecessary details fade. This is another form of tidying. Not everything needs to be kept at full volume. Your brain is allowed to forget. In fact, forgetting can be a gift you give yourself. And with that thought, you can let the next breath be slower, the next exhale longer, and the mind a little quieter around the edges, as if each fact we've shared becomes lighter and more distant, like lanterns drifting up and away, while you remain warm, still, and safely on the shore of sleep. And as those lanterns drift, it can be soothing to remember that your brain is not trying to keep you awake. It's trying to protect you, guide you, and learn from you. Sleep is part of that protection. One quiet way to see it is this. The brain is always balancing two needs. One is to stay alert enough to respond to the world. The other is to go offline enough to restore itself. Night is when the balance finally tilts toward restoration. And restoration includes tiny repairs you never feel directly. For example, the brain's wiring depends on myelin, a kind of insulating layer around many nerve fibers. Myelin helps signals travel faster and more reliably, like a smooth coating on a wire. It isn't fixed forever. It can change with experience, and it can be maintained and adjusted over time. Some research suggests that sleep may support processes linked to myelin health and the upkeep of neural circuits. It's another gentle reminder that sleep isn't wasted time, it's maintenance time, a quiet workshop running in the dark. Now, let's drift into the way your brain handles colour. You might think colour lives out there in the world, painted onto objects. But colour is something your brain constructs from the wavelengths of light that reach your eyes. The same object can reflect different light under different conditions, and yet you tend to see it as relatively stable in colour. A white shirt looks white in the morning and at sunset, even though the light is very different. That stability is called colour constancy. It's another example of your brain editing reality into something useful. It doesn't only measure light, it estimates what the lighten is likely to be, and then it corrects the scene. This is why some color illusions can be so striking. They hack the brain's correction system, making two identical colors appear different depending on context. Your brain is trying to be faithful to the object, not to the raw light. It's loyal to meaning again. Now, let's drift to something even more private: pain. Pain is real, but it isn't a simple readout of tissue. It's a protective experience built by the brain from many inputs: sensory signals, attention, memory, emotion, expectation, and context. This is why the same injury can feel different in different situations, and why calm attention can sometimes soften discomfort. The brain can turn the volume up or down. There are even descending pathways from the brain that can dampen pain signals in the spinal cord. In moments of urgency, the brain can temporarily reduce pain so you can act. In safe conditions, pain may return to encourage rest and care. It's not always pleasant, but it's purposeful. And at night, when you're safe, you can sometimes help the system by offering the brain reassurance through posture, warmth, stillness, and slow breathing. Cues that say, there's nothing to solve right now. Now, another calm curiosity about perception. Your brain is constantly inferring what's causing what. If something happens right after something else, the brain may link them, even if the connection is coincidence. This tendency is part of how you learn patterns in the world, and it's also why superstitions can be tempting. The brain would rather have a pattern than have uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, but sleep is one place where you don't need certainty. You can let some questions remain unanswered. You can let the brain stop hunting for causes and simply rest in sensations. Now, here's a softer detail about language. When you speak, it feels like you choose a sentence and then say it. But under the surface, the brain is selecting words and assembling grammar in fractions of a second. Many options are activated at once, then quickly narrowed. It's like a gentle competition where the most fitting word wins. And when you listen, your brain does something similar in reverse. It predicts likely words based on context, then updates with what you actually hear. This is why you can understand speech even when it's mumbled or when there's noise. The brain is filling in gaps with probability. You live inside probability more than you realize. Now, drift with me toward a simple experience: reading. When you read silently, you may hear the words in your mind. That inner sound is your brain's language system, collaborating with auditory imagery. But reading also involves subtle movement planning. Your eyes scan in saccades, your attention hops, your brain parses structure and meaning in layers. It's a complex dance that feels effortless once learned. Effortless is what the brain loves to achieve, and it's why learning something new can feel clumsy at first. The brain hasn't built efficient pathways yet. It has to recruit extra attention, extra monitoring. Over time, with repetition, the effort fades into smoothness. Tonight, smoothness is your only task. Now, here's a calming thought about intelligence in the brain. It isn't located in a single spot. It emerges from coordination. A brain can be brilliant in one domain and average in another. And even within one person, abilities can vary with sleep, stress, hunger, and mood. Your brain is not a fixed score. It's a living system that changes from hour to hour. So if you felt a little scattered today, that's not a verdict. It's a state, and states can pass. Now, let's return to the gentle theme of dreams, but through the lens of emotion. Some nights, you may dream about social situations, small embarrassments, unfinished tasks. These themes can be common because the brain is deeply social and deeply predictive. It likes to rehearse. It runs simulations to prepare for future possibilities. But rehearsals in dreams don't have to be taken literally. A dream can be the brain practicing feelings, not facts. And sometimes, after an emotional day, sleep can help soften the edges of memory. People often notice that a difficult event can feel a little less sharp after a good night's sleep. Not erased, just less jagged. One idea is that sleep helps separate the factual content of a memory from the strongest emotional charge, allowing you to remember without reliving at full intensity. A gentle untangling. Now, here's a quiet piece of brain geography that often shapes emotion: the amygdala. It's involved in detecting significance, especially potential threat, and in attaching emotional weight to experiences. The amygdala isn't a fear center in a simple sense. It responds to importance, uncertainty, and intensity. In a calm context, it can respond to novelty and excitement too. And during sleep, especially after enough rest, the brain's emotional circuits often become better regulated. You may notice that worries feel more manageable in the morning. The same thought can be there, but it doesn't grip as tightly. That's not only willpower, that's biology, doing its nightly work. Now, let's drift into a softer mystery: why you can't tickle yourself. If you try, it just doesn't feel the same. One reason is that your brain predicts the sensory consequences of your own movements. When you move your hand toward your side, your brain generates an internal copy of that motor command and predicts what the touch will feel like. Then it subtracts some of the sensation because it's expected. Tickling relies on surprise. Your brain protects you from surprising yourself, at least in that way. This same prediction system helps you feel in control of your body. It's part of why your movements feel like yours. When prediction matches outcome, you get a smooth sense of agency. And at night, agency can relax. You don't need to steer each thought. You can let the brain's predictive engine idle, letting expectations soften, letting sensations be simple. Now, another gentle phenomenon that reveals the brain's shortcuts is the uncanny valley. When something looks almost human but not quite, it can feel strangely unsettling. A face that's nearly right but slightly off can trigger a mismatch signal. The brain's social perception systems are tuned to tiny details in faces and movement. When those details don't align with expectations, the brain flags it. It's not irrational. It's a finely tuned pattern detector, noticing a small error. And pattern detection is everywhere. You detect patterns in music, in speech, in weather, in people. The brain is a pattern-making machine because patterns are how it predicts the future. But tonight, you don't need to predict much. The future can wait until morning. Now, here's a soft truth about the moments just before sleep. Your mind may start producing brief images: a doorway, a field, a random object, often without story. This can happen because visual and associative areas begin to generate dreamlike content, while the control systems of waking thought loosen. The images are not messages. They're simply the brain shifting gears, like a projector warming up in an empty room. If you notice these images, you can let them come and go. No need to interpret, no need to follow. They can drift past like clouds, and as they drift, you can rest in something deeply reassuring. Your brain has done this before, thousands of times. It knows how to cross into sleep, even if it takes a while, even if thoughts chatter, even if you wake briefly. The system is built for return. So let your breath be easy. Let your face be soft. Let your attention float, not gripping, not chasing, just listening as the night carries you onward, deeper into the calm, curious landscape of the sleeping mind.